Chapter 10. The Clooney that emerged from the ragged tent in the meadow was far from being sick in the head. The members of the horde watched the way he strode purposefully about. The old glint was back in his single eye. His orders were crisp and concise. Even the long tail had a fresh crack about it. The chief seemed sharper than he had been before. In the aftermath of the tunnel disaster, Clooney had called off the attack for a full day, withdrawing all his followers well back across the meadow. The warlord gave his horde time to recuperate from the fiasco, a whole day's leisure, with no recriminations and hardly any orders. The captains of Redwall wasted no time in making use of the temporary respite. Repairs were started upon the gatehouse door. Teams of woodland carpenters, abbey smiths, and laborers, plus any creature that felt the need to help, were lowered down to the road in large wickerwork baskets. Should the enemy in the meadow decide to make any sudden move, the workmen could be speedily hauled back up to the ramparts. All that day, the rope gangs were kept busy sending down wood, spikes, cordage, tools, and repair materials. Clooney sat and watched them from the distance as he talked aloud to himself. "Good work, mice. Strengthen my gates. I wouldn't want to rule a fortress with broken doors." Fingburn was passing. He overheard Clooney conversing with himself. Not sure whether the remarks were addressed to him, he stopped. "Are you feeling all right, Chief?" "Never better," Clooney replied. He pointed at the repair crews. "See that, Fingburn? Honest, industrious work. And what for, huh?" Fingburn hazarded a guess. "To keep us out, Chief?" "No, to stop us getting in." Clooney chuckled. "Get some soldiers and light a fire down in the ditch. Make it a proper blaze, good and hot." Fingburn knew better than to question the reason for his chief's order, no matter how strange it sounded. "The big fire? Right you are, Chief. I'll get them going right away." Fingburn hurried off, aware that Clooney was watching him. Shortly after, there was a huge fire burning in the ditch. The horde gathered close by to see what Clooney was up to. The crackling flames gave off waves of heat, causing everyone to step back. Above the ditch, the air shimmered and danced. Clooney stood in the ditch, claws on hips. He cracked his tail. "Scumnose! Mingshfer! Bring up those dormice prisoners!" The 20 dormice were dragged forward in a pitiable condition. They cowered on the ground in front of the warlord, half-starved and dull-eyed. Clooney pointed. "You, leader mouse! What's your name again?"
"Plumpin, sir,"
the bedraggled mouse replied. Clooney grabbed Plumpin roughly, dragging him away from his fellow captives on the ground. "What are these other miserable creatures to you, Plumpin?" he snapped. The dormouse explained in a shaky voice.
"My family, sir. My mother, father, brothers, sisters, and my wife and 2 little ones. Please, sir, spare them, I beg you."
Clooney laughed cruelly. His eye was devoid of pity. He leaned close to Plumpin and whispered harshly. "What would you do to save them?" The dormouse watched Clooney's eyes rove lazily from his family to the blazing inferno.
Anything you say! What do you want of me?"
He screamed in his fear and anxiety. Clooney cracked his tail triumphantly, pulling Plumpin forward until their noses touched. The big rat's voice was as foul and evil as his breath. "Listen carefully. You are going to open the Abbey door for me, my friend. If you fail, your precious little family will pay the penalty. Now, here's what you must do." Constance hauled upon her rope. It was no hard task for a fully grown badger. On the other ropes there were creatures that could not compare with her for strength. But they hauled and pulled with an equally good will. Cornflower and Silent Sam kept busy supplying cool drinks and sweat cloths. The repair work went ahead at a steady pace. No one noticed there was an extra mouse laboring among the workers in the roadway. Plumpin. Clooney had supplied him with a habit taken from the body of one who had fallen slain from the ramparts. Plumpin had concealed himself in the ditch and traveled under cover until he was level with the gatehouse. At the appropriate moment, he slipped out with a plank upon his shoulder and joined the workforce. They toiled away industriously until Jess Squirrel, who was acting as overseer, decided that the work was completed, as indeed it was. The old gatehouse door looked as good as new. All the tools and spare timber were gathered up, and the roadway was swept. Satisfied with a job well done, the work crews stacked up their materials and were hauled up to the ramparts in the large grain baskets. Plumpin sat between Brother Alf and Brother Rufus. Across the meadow, he could see Clooney, watching. Always watching. Plumpin cursed the fate that had put him and his family in the hands of the rats. What a happy, friendly lot the Redwall creatures were. He was served afternoon tea, sitting on the grass in the cloisters. The dormouse felt the good food turn to ashes in his mouth at the thought of his betrayal of fellow mice. But there was no alternative if he wanted to save his family. After tea, he wandered off on the pretense of carrying out some fictitious task. When there was nobody about, he hid himself in the old gatehouse den which had once been Methuselah's study. Locking the door, Plumpin lay down lonely and miserable to await nightfall. Inside Cavern Hole, the Father Rabbit addressed a morale-boosting speech to his captains. Friends, it will avail Clooney little to put the Abbey under a state of siege. As you know, Redwall is virtually self-supporting. All we require to sustain life and comfort is here within these walls. Therefore, I suggest we carry on as normally as possible. However, the walls must always be guarded. I leave it to you, my captains. Stay ever vigilant against Clooney and his horde. I know that with your counsel and good judgment, we will soon see the day when the enemy are forced to go elsewhere and leave Redwall in peace. There was loud applause for the abbot's heartening words, but Constance was not convinced. She whispered her thoughts to Basil and Jess. Never. Clooney won't leave us alone until either we are dead or he is. Basil Staghair nodded in agreement. I know, old scout, but the abbot's such a decent old buffer that he believes there's good in everyone, even Clooney. What? And so do I, Jess muttered. I believe Clooney will be good someday. Good and dead. Gradually, the day drew to a close. Lights dimmed as Redwall prepared for a well-deserved night's rest. The meadowland and woods grew quiet and peaceful. On top of the walls, sentries leaned on the parapet, listening to the evening bird songs. Across the meadows, the enemy campfires burned low into the soft June night. Plumpin waited another hour, as Clooney had instructed. Then it was time to make his move. Stealing quietly out of the gatehouse study, the dormouse headed north, staying well within the deep shadow of the wall. At the small north wall gate, Plumpin drew a scarlet cloth from his habit. Smearing the bolts with grease from the cloth, he silently worked them loose. Coney lay watching the gate from behind a sycamore in the woods. Near to every other entrance, one of Clooney's most trusted soldiers was concealed, awaiting the signal. It was the ferret who was rewarded by the sight of the scarlet cloth being shoved through the door jamb. He hurried away to tell Clooney. It was dead of night when Clooney's horde moved out of the meadow. Around the embers of each campfire, bundles of grass and twigs had been wrapped in blankets. To the unsuspecting sentries on the wall, the bundles looked like sleeping forms. They sensed nothing amiss. The horde circled northwards through the meadowlands until Clooney judged they were far enough from Redwall to escape detection. It crossed the road at the head of his army. They filtered back through the leafy cover of nighttime mossflower towards the Abbey. Now that his goal was in sight, Clooney used all the stealth of a stalking hunter, waiting until the entire horde was in position. Each soldier crouching quietly among the ferns and bushes knew the penalty for making any sound that would betray their presence. Not death from the defenders, but death at the claws of their own chieftain. Clooney could wait. He gave it another half hour, until he could actually see some of the guards on top of the wall nodding off at their posts. What was 30 minutes after he had waited so long for this moment? With practiced skill, he slid from his hiding place and crossed to the wall door. One gentle push, and the small iron door swung slowly open on its greased hinges. Clooney stood in the doorway as his soldiers filed past him on their way to the Abbey building. There was little need to worry about the wall guards. Those who were awake would be watching the road or the enemy camp, their backs turned on the secret invaders. Plumpin stood by, anxiously watching the warlord. At least his family would be safe now. The Dormouse had faithfully carried out his part in the dreadful scheme. Clooney must surely keep to his word. He did not see the look that passed between Clooney and Fangburn. Fangburn swung the heavy club and brought it crashing down on the back of Plumpin's head from behind. The unlucky Dormouse crumpled to the ground without a sound. Clooney the Scourge bared his fangs, grinning wickedly into the dark. He had finally brought his horde into Redwall.